So let's go on to today, because I really want to cover the material that is on for today. And let's, as always, begin, if you will, with a prayer. And so I will just stop the share for a bit so that we can begin with a prayer. And then afterwards we will get going. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the messages you have given to us through the Bible and through the studies of Daniel. And as we get into the study today, we pray that you will guide us. Is our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. All right, so let's go back into our screen share and kind of get it going. Again, like I said, if you can talk to any of your colleagues who are normally on the channel on YouTube, and I know there are a lot of them. We normally have about 30-something people who are normally on YouTube. We will have to let them know that we are only using Zoom today. All right, so let's get going. So today we move into our continuing look at Daniel, and we basically are at lesson 6, which is surviving the lion's den. This is a very familiar passage of scripture, but I wanted to take today and just do a quick review. It won't be long in the review. And the poll questions at the end, we will keep that up and we will use those to sort of get a sense, if you will, as to what is happening with respect to your understanding. I know some of you are okay, and some of you say you are struggling a little bit with the material as presented. So we'll see how far we can advance the presentation today, and then we take it from there. So today we are looking at chapter 6, which is Daniel in the lion's den, and then from chapter 7 to 12, we get into a lot of deep prophecy. But before we get straight into that, we will have to do some work with respect to preparing for those chapters, and I'll talk about that to the end of the presentation. So we are into lesson 6, surviving the lion's den. Our review of the key points continues in the same vein that we have done in the past, which is to basically suggest to us that what we are focusing on is what is today known as modern day Iraq and Iran, which is primarily Babylon would have existed in those times of Daniel, and that it will have included part of what is modern day Turkey today, and that is the theater of action. That is the place where all of this is taking place, and that is the place where all the various activities that we cover in the book of Daniel, this is the theater of action. This is where everything is taking place. In the ancient days, it would be known as Mesopotamia, which is really a Greek word for meaning between the rivers, but it's important. Now, I want to say to you that the reason we are spending so much time on the book of Daniel and Revelation is that we are strongly of the view that the stories and prophecies in Daniel are applicable to our time. I wanted to just emphasize that. And so part of your challenge, if you will, as you go forward, is to do two things. One is to understand what took place then, and then the other would be to see how we can relate to what took place and get it into the place where we understand what it is. All right, so that is kind of what is our focus as we go forward. This is just letting some people know it's Zoom only today, right? All right, so we talk about the theater of action. Then the other thing I wanted to remind you very quickly is that Daniel is occurring where we had Jerusalem occurring on the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea, and they were captured and carried to Babylon. So rather than go through my normal summary, I thought today that I will share with you a video that I pulled off of YouTube that I think is extremely good as a summary. The thing about this Bible project is that sometimes their analysis is more historical and not necessarily theological. So we'll have to come back and maybe ratify some of the things that they said. But I thought it was pretty mundane enough to allow us to be able to use it for this process. if we need to provide a summary, I mean, it speaks to what they view as some of the key points for chapters 7 to 12. When we get to those chapters, we will deal with some of the theories that they raise that I want to correct. But some of the things that they talk about with respect to Daniel chapters 7 to 12 is really rooted in their understanding of preterism and futurism and historicism, etc. But we'll come to that. But it really acts as a very, it's on YouTube, as a very simple summary of Daniel that I wanted to use today, if only to give us some sort of grounding in what we have looked at over the last 6 weeks or so. All right, so let's just take that in very quickly.
The book of Daniel. The story is set right after Babylon's first attack on Jerusalem, and they had plundered the city and its temple and taken a wave of Israelites into exile. Among them were 4 men from the royal family of David. Daniel, whose later name Belteshazzar, and his 3 friends, who you probably know by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This book tells of their struggles to maintain hope in the land of their conquerors. The book's design seems pretty simple at first. Chapters 1 through 6 contain stories about Daniel and his friends in Babylon, while chapters 7 through 12 contain the visions of Daniel about the future. But this 2-part shape is made even more interesting by another design feature, and that's the book's language. It begins in Hebrew, the language of the Israelites, but chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic, a cousin language to Hebrew spoken widely among the ancient empires. But then in chapters 8 through 12, it goes back to Hebrew. This design shows how chapters 2 through 7 are a coherent section, but it also highlights the importance of chapters 2 and 7 for understanding the later chapters of the book. Let's just dive in. Chapter 1 introduces the basic tension of the first half of the book. Daniel and his friends, they're really wise and capable, and they're recruited to serve in the royal palace of Babylon. But they're pressured to give up their Jewish identity by living and eating like Babylonians and violating the Jewish food laws found in the Torah. So they refuse, and they choose faithfulness to the Torah, and it puts them in danger. But God delivers them, and they end up being elevated by the king of Babylon. After this begins the Aramaic section, which you'll see has this really cool symmetrical design. So first, the king of Babylon has a dream that, it turns out, only Daniel is able to interpret. It's about a huge statue made of 4 types of metal, and it symbolizes a sequence of kingdoms, and the head is Babylon. But then a huge rock comes flying in, and it shatters the statue, and it becomes this huge mountain. Now, this dream is the first of many symbolic visions in the book, and this one introduces the basic storyline of them all. Daniel says that the statue represents a train of human kingdoms following from Babylon, and they will all fill God's world with violence. But one day, God's kingdom will come and will confront and humble the arrogant kingdoms of this world and fill the world with the healing justice of God's reign and rule. After this, chapter 3 tells the famous story of Daniel's 3 friends who refuse to bow down and worship a huge idol statue, which, like the statue in chapter 2, represents the king and his imperial power. And so the friends are persecuted. They're thrown into a fiery furnace, but God delivers them from death, and they're exalted by the king, who now acknowledges their God as the true one. After this come a pair of stories about 2 Babylonian kings, the father, Nebuchadnezzar, and then his son, Belshazzar. They're both filled with pride because of their imperial power, and so, like in chapter 2, God warns them both through dreams and then visions, which, also like chapter 2, only Daniel can interpret. He says that both kings are to humble themselves before God, and both kings arrogantly resist. So Nebuchadnezzar is stricken with madness. He becomes like a beast in the field. But then he humbles himself before God, and his humanity returns to him. He's restored as king. This is in contrast with his son, Belshazzar, who doesn't humble himself before God, and he's assassinated that very night. Now, these 2 stories draw this imagery from Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and Psalm 8, where humans are depicted as the royal image of God. He's given them authority to rule over the beasts of the field and the birds of the air on behalf of God, who is the world's true king. But when human kingdoms forget that, when they rebel and make themselves and their power into a God, they become less than human, like violent beasts who will face God's justice. Which brings us to chapter 6, the pair of chapter 3. And this time it's Daniel who's being persecuted because he refuses to pray and worship the king as a god. And so like the friends, he's sentenced to death and he's thrown into a lion's den. But God delivers him from the beasts, and like the friends, the king exalts Daniel and praises his God, which brings us to chapter 7. It's the pair of chapter 2 and the center of the book where all its themes come together. It's another dream, but it's Daniel's this time. And ironically, he can't understand the dream until an angelic messenger explains it to him. He sees a series of 4 beasts, one like a lion, then like a bear, then one like a winged leopard, each of these symbolizing an arrogant kingdom. And last of all is a super beast, identified as a really evil empire. And it has lots of horns, a common symbol for kings in the Old Testament. And there's one specific horn who is an image of an arrogant king who exalts himself above God and persecutes God's people. Now they are symbolized by a figure called the Son of Man, who's an image for both God's covenant people, but also for their king from the line of David. But then all of a sudden, God, who's called the Ancient of Days, comes and he sets up his throne. He destroys the super beast and he exalts the Son of Man on the clouds, where he comes up to sit at God's right hand and share in God's rule over the nations. We can look back now and see how all of these stories in the first half fit together. The 3 stories of faithfulness despite persecution, these are meant to offer hope to God's suffering people among the nations. But they suffer because human kingdoms have rebelled against God and have become beasts. And so these visions encourage patience, that God's people are to wait for him to bring his kingdom and rule over our world and vindicate his suffering people. But it raises the question about when God is going to do that, and that's what these final 3 visions set out to explore. In chapter 8, Daniel has another vision about the final 2 beasts of chapter 7, but this time they're symbolized by a ram, who we're told is the image of the empire of the Medes and Persians, and then by a goat, who's an image of ancient Greece. And out of the goat come a whole bunch of horns, one of which symbolizes the evil king from chapter 7. And we're told more about him, that he will attack Jerusalem and exalt himself above God and defile the temple with idols. However, in the end, he will be destroyed by God, who will exalt his people and his kingdom. Now, by chapter 9, Daniel is very puzzled, especially as to when all of this is going to take place. And so he consults the scroll of the prophet Jeremiah, where God said that Israel's exile would only last 70 years. So for Daniel, the 70 years is almost up. And so he asks God to fulfill his promise soon. But an angel comes and informs him that Israel's sin and rebellion has continued. And so their time of exile and oppression will continue on 7 times longer than Jeremiah envisioned. Daniel is deeply disturbed by this, and he has one final vision. We're shown the same sequence of kingdoms. It's Persia, then Greece, and Alexander the Great, followed by lesser kings, all leading up to this final king of the north, who will invade Jerusalem, set up idols in the temple, and exalt himself above God. But then, all of a sudden, this king comes to ruin. Now, there's been endless debate about what all of these visions refer to. Many see a clear connection to the exploits of the Syrian king Antiochus in the 160s BC. He killed many faithful Jews in Jerusalem and set up idols in the temple. Others think it points forward to the Roman Empire's role in the execution of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. And still
I'll continue it in a bit. Let me just say that certainly the Antiochus view is one of the preterism view that seems to suggest that this has happened already in the past when we get to chapters 7 and 8, and we'll talk about that. And then the Roman Empire destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, which was indeed a singular event in the history of the Jews that happened after Christ had died, is also seen as a preterism view. So I just wanted to interject that to tie it back to the views that we've been talking about: preterism, futurism, and historicism. So clearly, while I like the video because it gives you a very good synopsis, when we get to these aspects of the video, I have a point of departure because they're taking a preterism view. But I thought it important if we need to tie the pieces together.
Others think it will be fulfilled in future events that have yet to happen when Jesus will return. Now, the problem is that the symbols and the numbers, they don't quite match any of these views perfectly. Now, there's been endless debate about what all of these visions refer to. Many see a clear connection to the exploits of the Syrian king Antiochus in the 160s BC. He killed many faithful Jews in Jerusalem and set up idols in the temple. Others think it points forward to the Roman Empire's role in the execution of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. And still others think it will be fulfilled in future events that have.
So once you hear that word future, you begin to appreciate that's what I was trying to highlight. That we're talking about futurism here. So these are basically two approaches being presented. There's no historicist view in this, but that is what we will study.
Yet to happen when Jesus will return. Now the problem is that the symbols and the numbers, they don't quite match any of these views perfectly. But it opens up the possibility that in a sense, they are all right. The book of Daniel has been designed to offer hope to all future generations of God's people. It did so in the days of Antiochus's empire, and it has ever since. This is why Jesus could use imagery from Daniel to describe and confront the oppressive leaders he confronted in Jerusalem. This is why John, the visionary who wrote the Revelation, could adapt Daniel's visions and apply them to Rome of his day and also all future oppressive empires. And so the point of Daniel is that all generations of readers can find here a pattern and a promise. It's a pattern that human beings and their kingdoms become violent beasts when they glorify their own power, when they redefine right and wrong and don't acknowledge God as their true king. But Daniel also holds out a promise that one day God will confront the beast. He will rescue his world and his people by bringing his kingdom over all nations. And so for every generation, this book speaks a message of hope that should motivate faithfulness. And that's what the book of Daniel is all about.
Okay, great. So I will hold there and take any questions. You can use the Q&A within Zoom, or if you raise your hand, I'll allow you to talk. But this is kind of a summary. And really, like I said, what I wanted to emphasize is that what we are seeing here is really
about
an
the future.
interesting...
But this two-part...
Right, so like I said, this was really meant to be a summary. Any questions, anybody? I think it ties back to all that we said. We talked a lot about the fact that Daniel seems to be divided into two sections, if you will. Chapters 1 to 6 are more in narrative sections, and they talk about the stories and the historical events, and chapters 7 to 12 are more the prophetic books that talk around the end time. All right, so that is fundamentally what is presented in the video, and I hope that the video, as simple as it is, gives you a good insight. And then, as I said, their interpretation, or at least, and they really haven't interpreted to be fair to them. They simply put out what others have said. Their views are wrong. Chapters 7 to 12, they have indicated some of the preteristic views and some of the futuristic views. And when we get to that section, we will spend a lot of time going through it from a historicist perspective. Let me just say very clearly that we always need to be careful, of course. I mean, I don't have to tell you that, but you know that there's a lot of stuff on the internet that you have to be careful about how you assimilate it and whether you accept it as true or not, right? So, or accurate, maybe is a better word. So certainly when it comes to biblical prophecy, that also applies. Our approach with biblical prophecy is to what we like to call, we use scripture to interpret scripture. We use context. We try not to see text within their own, its own context and by itself, but to see it in the context of what is the situation and what it is trying to portray. So I accept fully that clearly the book of Daniel is about recognizing, certainly in those first chapters, people's faithfulness, and recognizing that when people are faithful, God honors their faithfulness. But it is also a book that speaks about the fact that within the controversy between good and evil, there would be periods where evil would look as if it is in full authority, full domination, if you will. But the faithful people of God need not to conform to the domination of the Babylonian empires, but to remain faithful to God. That is the fundamental message. And then what we will discover along the way are timelines and markers that God has identified that kind of points towards the end of time and suggests that if we are living through periods of persecution and periods where we are being we experience adverse effects for standing up to our faith, that doesn't mean that we should give up, but we should remain faithful to God nonetheless. And that is a key message, really. So when we get to surviving in the lion's den, this is our final narrative encounter. And it is another experience of where a follower of God, the true God, is persecuted for their faithfulness to God, but God sees them through to the very end. And we saw that when we did chapter 3, when we looked at the fiery furnace, and we've seen it again when we do chapter 6, which is that in the lion's den. And along the way, we will have been given a history of the civilizations and the nations that would have dominated that part of the world and into the end of time. And the reason for that is to give us some sort of timeline so that we understand that God has a timetable and that he's working his way through to the end. All right, so that is my fundamental message with respect to that. Everybody okay? Any questions? Anybody has anything they wish to say or raise at this time? If you're all okay, we can continue to move on. Because today we want to talk a little about the lion's den. I don't expect that we'll spend long on this, but certainly it will give us enough to talk about. And I'll have to, after all of this, figure out why we can't stream to YouTube. All right, but we will do that and then put it back up after the session for those who missed out on the YouTube at this point in time. So let's go to surviving the lion's den. Just as we have done in the previous chapters, I wanted to summarize Daniel chapter 6 in one quick go. So what we are going to look at is the deliverance of Daniel from the lion's den, and we say that this is one of the more beloved stories in the Bible. I mean, children grow up reading this and everybody is aware of it. But today, as senior folks, we're taking a look at it with a different eye because we understand the context of Daniel, and we understand that when we read stories about faithfulness and persecution, that maybe God has given us messages for the end time. Is that okay? So let's keep going. It is similar, of course, to what we saw in Daniel chapter 3. Bear in mind, and I should just highlight this, and I like to talk about the fact that we, as a church, certainly we do not extol, we do not advocate what is called prosperity Christianity. In other words, there is nothing to us to suggest that as night follows day, if you come to God, you will experience all God's blessings and everything will be okay. The reality is that even when you have accepted Christ and allow him to rule your life and be part of who you are, you may still experience drama. But God expects us to remain faithful even when things are bad and even when we go through adverse circumstances. So notice that in both the story of the 3 Hebrew boys in Daniel chapter 3 and the story of Daniel in the lion's den, in both stories, the faithful followers of God are thrown into the place of persecution. So in the case of the 3 Hebrew boys, they actually went into the furnace, but God delivered them while they were in the furnace. And in the case of Daniel, he is actually thrown into the lion's den, and God delivers him while he is in the lion's den. So that is a key point to note, that part of being a Christian who follows Jesus Christ is not that it inoculates us or protects us from persecution and drama and pain in our lives, but that God gives us the ability to go through the persecution and come out victorious and vindicated. And that is something you need to remember. What God does is that he prepares us and he steels us and he strengthens us for drama rather than avoiding drama. So coming to Christ is not an avoidance of drama. It is a strength to go through drama, and that is what is important, right? So both stories show God's faithfulness by empowering his servants to remain steadfast even amid harrowing trials. And that is a big lesson for us, right? Both showcase captives demonstrating their loyalty to God at the risk of their own lives. So that is important. You know, there's a text in the New Testament that says, what greater love than God would have laid down his life for mankind. And that is important. When people say they love you and stuff, are they willing to die for you? Not a lot of people are able to do that. But God is saying that our love for him, and maybe that is a reflective, rhetorical question we need to ask, is our love for God so deep that if our lives were threatened for the love of God and our conviction to God, would we still remain faithful to him? And that is, that may not have come into our domain and our existence, but if it did, if we were asked to die or renounce God or die, what would we choose? Is our conviction and our conversion and our commitment to God so strong that we will do this and not do anything else? And we talk a little about that as we go along, right? Both show a divine messenger who is entering the fray to both support and deliver those who are persecuted. So in both instances, we find a divine messenger involved who comes and represents God during the fiery furnace. In the case of the fiery furnace, it was Jesus. In the case of Daniel the lions, it was an angel, we are told. And we'd see about that, right? Daniel's integrity and loyalty to public service had the new king planning to appoint him over the whole kingdom. It's important to note that Christians must be Christians in every sphere of our lives. So it means that even when we work, and we work for Caesar, as some would like to say, we must work faithfully. Christians are not slackers. Christians are not those who don't give an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. Daniel, even when he lived as a captive in a heathen foreign nation that was destroying his own hometown, he still remained faithful to God. And that is fundamental to understanding that we must be seen as good exemplars and good examples of what God is doing in our lives by being hardworking and diligent, right? Daniel's colleagues, which were of course the people who were part of the kings, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, they crafted a scheme to get rid of him, only to have it fail. So the people who were working with him, who of course were non-Hebrews in the most instances, some argue that they were Chaldeans more than anything else. They decided that Daniel was getting too much favor because of his hard work and diligence. And a lot of you can relate to that. You've seen that in the workplace where sometimes you are, people are jealous of your success and they want, I don't want you to have a persecution complex, but at the same time, that's just being pragmatic and being real that these things happen. And people try to set up schemes and stuff to get rid of us, right? And God was with Daniel, and he vindicated him before his enemies and the king. So these are the 8 key points, really. The first 6 or so of them are really about the God's being supportive of people who are faithful to him. And then the last 3, if you will, or the first 5, and the last 3 deals with the actual sequence of events, which we'll come to. So let me just say to you that there are 5 main sections when we look at the chapter. The first is really around the plot against faithful Daniel. So there is a plot that is established, and we talk about why there was a plot in the first place, and that's verses 1 to 5. We'll talk about the nature of the plot, what they actually come up with as the plot. We'll talk about Daniel being faithful even though he knows there is a plot. That is important. Daniel chose to remain faithful even though he knew his life was threatened. And again, I ask, how many of us have the conviction to remain faithful even though we know our lives are threatened? And that is really, really phenomenal if you think about what Daniel has been able to do there. We talk about the accusation, the fact that he's thrown in the lions den. Of course, the big story out of all of this is that God delivers Daniel. And then we talk about the fact that judgment, that term comes up again, because throughout this book we are seeing where God executes judgment. He did it just last week when we looked at chapter 5 with Belshazzar. And he's doing it again, where he executes judgment upon those who are persecuting and accusing his people. And then God is eventually praised, right? So I suspect that there is a little mini story inside of here, where you see the development of a plot, the nature of the plot is exposed, God's people are accused, God delivers his people, and then those who are against God are destroyed, and God is praised. If this was a controversy between good and evil, what it shows at the end is that good is the one that wins and succeeds and is victorious. All right, so that is the underlying theme, if you will, that is added to where we are today. So let's keep going. And remember, you can stop me at any time if you have a question. You can use the Q&A within Zoom, or you can raise your hand and I will notice you, and we take it from there, right? So let me just say to you that Darius is now the king, because we've gone past Nebuchadnezzar, and we have gone past the Babylonians, because Belshazzar was the last Babylonian king. And he was destroyed last week with the handwriting on the wall. The handwriting on the wall said, Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. And it meant you have been weighed in the balances, you have been examined, you have been investigated. And when we examine you, you found you wanting, and so your kingdom will be destroyed. And we are told that Cyrus, and by the way, we at the end of this chapter in Daniel chapter 6, the very last verse, it actually speaks to Cyrus and Darius as being together as the ones who rule. So last week we talked a lot about Cyrus, and we said Cyrus was the Persian king, and he was the one who was attacking Belshazzar and Babylon. And when he had overcome Babylon by passing through the river Euphrates and getting into the city, he appointed Darius as king, and he went after Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, or whatever you want to call him, Nabonidus. And that was a different argument altogether, right? So Darius is now the king, and the war is over, and he's about to run his place. So he appoints 120 satraps, which is just another word for governors or rulers. We are familiar with governors. United States, each of the states in the US, they are run by governors who have local control. And then as a federal nation coming together, you have the president of the United States, right? So he has overall control of the nation, but each governor has individual control. And certainly during this COVID epidemic, we saw a lot of dynamics between governors and president. There's a similar situation here. Darius is the king. He's the one in charge. He has established a number of governors who are covering various regions, right? And as he does that, he knows that he runs a risk that they may use their power to plot against the king, because they feel as if they have a lot of power and they want to overthrow the king. But nonetheless, he's appointed 120. So this is a huge group of governors. And that's to tell you how vast and wide Babylon was as a nation. And also, this was before internet and television and video conferencing. So you basically had to figure out how to get people, and from time to time you will bring them to the capital of Babylon, and they will discuss things, and then they will go back. So to a large extent, they ran their provinces without much interference from the center, which was where Darius, the king himself, was. So Darius had noted that, and I will talk a little bit about the structure in a little bit, but he had noted that Daniel was very loyal, and he sought to appoint him ruler over the kingdom. So that is important. And I immediately ask if the way we work within the world and within the real world on the outside, can people look at us and be very proud about our work ethic and the way we work? And sometimes will that earn us the right to promotion and to other things, right? So here was Daniel being a very fine example of a hardworking man. And because he was going to be promoted, that made the governors jealous, because they wanted the position that was being offered to Daniel. And we talk about that position. So let's talk a little bit about structure. So you had 120 satraps, if you will, governors, who would run the various areas, right? The king was the one who was kind of always in charge. This is clearly shown in Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 to 2, which it talks about how the place was structured. He had 3 presidents over these satraps. Daniel was one of them. So there were 3 presidents. So that was the structure of the nation. So this is what Darius established. He is the king. He has his office of the king and everything taken care of. he couldn't have 120 men reporting to him. That was just too much. He really didn't know what was going on. So he appointed 3 presidents. Daniel was one of them. So Daniel is a Hebrew who has been captured. He's now about 80 years by all estimates and historians. And he is still very sharp and alert. His healthy diet has helped him to the point where he maintains his vigor, his vitality, and his brain, his intellect. So he is one of the leaders, if you will, of Babylon during this period. And together with the other 2 presidents, they are running these startups. My mind's eye suggests that they may have divided them equally, 40, 40, 40, but who knows? Maybe Daniel would have also had control over different types and how big the areas were, etc., and how far stretched they were and stuff, right? So this is what the king inherited, or he first established. As he ran this structure, he looked at it and he said, you know, I could improve this because I am still not happy with 3 people reporting to me. He felt he needed somebody who had overall charge of the running of the nation, so he could kind of maybe enjoy himself, do other things, go on flights and talk to different people, be more of an ambassador or whatever, I don't know. But here it was that the king felt he needed to have a different arrangement, right? So this is the arrangement he proposed. He will still have his 120 satraps who are the governors. He will still have 3 presidents looking after them, but he will establish Daniel as a sort of COO, Chief Operating Officer. He's the man. He's the one who runs everything. And the intent would be that only one person will report to the king, and that would be Daniel. So whenever the king wanted to know what's happening in the nation, he comes to Daniel, and Daniel will have tremendous power in this heathen country of the Medes and the Persians, all right? So that is kind of what is taking place. Of course, he is a Jew, so he doesn't belong to these people. He doesn't come from the Chaldeans or from any of the groups around. So they are naturally jealous of the fact that Daniel has been elevated to this point. I suggest that there is some prejudice that is taking place as well, because when they describe him, they don't talk about him as an administrator. They talk about him as one of those Jews who was captured and brought to Babylon. So in a way, they saw him as a second-class citizen and not deserving of these higher positions. Again, that is not unique to that period. It is certainly consistent with what we see in the world today, where people look at some people and just assume that they are not worthy of good positions, etc. And that causes all kind of prejudices, right? So there's a little bit of prejudice, there's jealousy. Everything is taking place within this group here because of the king's intent, stated intent, to elevate Daniel to be the single person who will report to him and who will control the rulings of the nation. And that is what Daniel chapter 6 verse 3 tells us, right? So as we move on now, we find that, so that's the context of the plot, because they are jealous. They don't want to see Daniel take on this prolific position, right? So that is the context. He shouldn't be the man in the middle here who controls everything. So in that context, they then come up with a plot. So the first thing they did, and I wanna just emphasize this, is that they investigated Daniel and found out that he was clean. He was a very compliant administrator. He was upright, hardworking, incorruptible, trustworthy. And that is phenomenal. I don't know too many of us are like this. We all have some weakness or shortcoming or some bad habit or something. Daniel was virtually perfect in the sight of the men when they examined him. So they could find no fault in Daniel. I use that term deliberately. When did we hear that term again? Certainly, when Jesus was brought before Pilate, that was the same term that was used. They could find no fault in him. He was perfect. So in a way, Daniel, immediately we begin to run some thinking in our head that Daniel is a type, a representation, if you will, of the Jesus Christ himself. Because here he is working to save the Jewish nation, but he is pure, he is embodied in the Babylonian system, but he is seen as upright and perfect. I could just stick a pin here and suggest that all of us need to pattern our lives to be like Daniel. When we are not just coming out of lion's den, but we are really honest and upright and hardworking individuals who really illuminate and who really send the signal to everyone who sees us that we are honest and faithful and loyal with no bad habits. It's a huge amount to ask, and some of us are already endowed with bad habits, but through God we can all become what He wants us to be, right? So if they could find no fault with his, they could find no fault with what he was doing and how he worked, they then said, well, okay, if we can't do that, I have a comment here that says the fault that they found was that was the reason Daniel was faultless, right? So what they then said is that what we can do is focus on the fact that he is faithful to God. And therefore we could use his faithfulness to his God as a fault that we could bring against him. I really would love to know that the only fault that people could find with me is that I'm faithful to my God. But I suppose all of us, we need to strive for that idea, right? So they knew he would stand firm and remain faithful to his God. And so they thought they will come up with a law that will not find fault with him, but that he will not be able to honor because of his faithfulness to his God. So what they did is that they came to the king. Of course, the king is, again, this is a different era. This is not Babylon anymore. This is Media Persia. This is Darius. He's a new king, but new king, old fault. The fault is vanity and hubris and pride. So they come to the king and they said, look, for the next 30 days, nobody in the kingdom should request anything unless it comes through you. You must be the man who must determine whatever people want, it must come through you. In a way, they were elevating the king to a deity, a god. So they were basically saying for the next 30 days, you are the sole God. People won't even, so he said, okay, that sounds nice, you know. And they said, well, he was the most likely say, well, why should I do this? And they said, well, you need to make sure these people are loyal to you and they're not trying to undercut you, because the king is always concerned about and suspicious and skeptical about people trying to undercut him. So this is a sign of loyalty. So again, that makes him look good. He feels good about that. And then they went on further and they said, and that includes things like prayers and stuff. They mustn't even pray to any other god except to you. And of course, by now, the king is on the top of the world in terms of his pride. And he says, fine. So he agrees to all of that. Once he has done that, Daniel, of course, is within the circle of the king. So he's aware of the laws that are being presented to the king, even though he wasn't there himself. And the thing about the Media Persians is that the Media Persians had a kind of inflexibility that is phenomenal for that period. The Media Persians was such that when they made a law, there was no change in the law. No man could change a Media Persian law. And so not even the king himself. So the king found himself almost trapped by his own decisions. And then the guys they went on to say, look, if anybody, for these 30 days, what is 30 days, king? You know, just 30 days? If during that 30 days, anybody doesn't show loyalty to you, they should remain alive. Throw them to the lions then. Of course, having lions in a kingdom was always part of the culture. And having them hungry was also part of the culture. Because every now and again, when you meet a traitor, you will just throw him to the lions den. It was a real clean way again with the people. There's no body to bury. The animals eat you completely and you keep them happy, right? So that was a threat that always hung over the heads of everybody. So once the law was signed, it could not be changed. That's the first thing. So the key is to get the king to sign the law. And then once he signs the law, he couldn't change. Now that is a real, in retrospect, that is a kind of stupid thing, because you should be able to change a law if it is not the right thing. But the king had, the Media Persians, culturally, had established a sort of governance structure that said, when we make a law, nobody could change it. As a matter of fact, they saw it as an omen to try to change it. So let's deal with Daniel now. Daniel knew that the writing was signed, and he went home. Daniel's habit, I want us to talk about that, right? Daniel's habit was to pray to his God 3 times a day, facing Jerusalem. Sometimes when we hear about our Muslim brothers who face the east when they pray, we trivialize it. But in the Jewish era, certainly from as early as in the days of Chronicles, the Jews had a habit when they were in foreign lands to face towards Jerusalem and pray to their nation when they prayed for the nation and for them coming out of what they do. So I want us to appreciate, though, don't get caught up too much in the prayer, because that was Daniel's habit. What I want to get here is to note that Daniel knew that this law was passed, but he chose to remain faithful to God. Now that is a key point, because here was Daniel aware that his physical body was being threatened. He could be thrown and put to death in the lion's den. But he made a decision to serve God, similar to the 3 Hebrew boys. What were his options? Obviously, he could have recanted and said, it's only 30 days. I don't need to still worship God. I could give that up. Or he could have said, why should I worry my head over this? I will easily just give up on this and do something else in the future. I could just wait it out. I just won't pray. Or I could close my room and hide, and nobody would see me and pray. Daniel continued on the path that had got him to where he was, and his habits continued. And I really like that. That is about faithfulness, right? So he was in the habit of praying, and he continued to pray. And again, that shows his faithfulness. I want to suggest that Daniel wasn't going out of his way to look for trouble. But the fact is that this decree from the king was against his service to his God. And that is where the difficulty lies, in that Daniel was finding himself in such a space where what was being asked by the king was in contrast to what God and his service to God was. And he was willing to give up his exalted position so that he could remain faithful to God. And that is a choice that he had made. I have one question coming in here. Let's see that. All right, so somebody is asking, did the 30 days have any prophetic symbolism? And the answer is no, not to any real extent. Can we interpret the 30 days with any prophetic symbolism? In other words, they were told a month. We could, I suppose, make some stretch as preachers and see that as a symbol of something. But in terms of the prophetic symbols, it didn't really mean anything. So it was simply the guys coming to the king and saying, look, if for 1 month, 30 days, people could remain faithful to you, then you would see who is really loyal to you or not. So the key here is that Daniel chose to serve God. There's another point around this that's extremely important, which is to say, there's our next slide, that this was really an issue of worship, in that Daniel was accustomed and had purpose in his heart to worship God. And he worshiped God by offering regular prayer and supplication for his people and for his nation, and by thanking God for being alive and for keeping him. I mean, Daniel was 80 years. He had been so much to be thankful for. So for him, worship for God was the real issue. It was the same problem with the 3 Hebrew boys. It was a worship issue. So I want to say to you that worship is the main point of conflict between good and evil. When we look at the controversy in the world between God and Lucifer, the devil, which we'll talk about in another lesson one of these days, is to recognize, and the key is, who do we worship? Who do we set up as worship, right? And then the question is, what will we do when our loyalty to God conflicts with our loyalty to our nation? And really, that's a difficult space to be in. It's not something I wish upon anybody. But if it happens, who do you choose? And then the decision we'll make depends on our attitude today. In other words, Daniel's decision that day was based on his habits from previous occasion. So some people say, well, you know, whenever I get in trouble, I will pick God. But really, what they do is that he remained faithful from the very beginning, and that is what carried him through to the very end, right? So another rhetorical question and one for retrospection and introspection. Do I pray to God every day? How is my daily relationship with Jesus? Daniel had a relationship with God, and that relationship is what influenced the decision he made to remain faithful to God. And I want us to always, always remember that if we remain faithful to God, then he will remain faithful to us. He had no foreknowledge that God will protect him in the lion's den. He had no way to know that. But he chose nonetheless to remain faithful to God. Okay? So I think we understand the context of the plot, the nature of the plot, and then the accusation that was made to him is what we will want to cover as we go forward now, right? So the other thing we want to cover is the accusation, right? So verse 14 says, and the king, when he had heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart to Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till going on with his son to deliver Daniel. And the king, when he realized what was happening, because the king is well aware that Daniel prays to his God every day. That is another thing that is important. Daniel didn't hide his religion. He didn't hide his beliefs. But he didn't throw it in the face of the king. He kind of said, look, this is how I am, this is what I do, and I'll work hard for you. And in doing that, the king was well aware. So the king now is a smart man, and he comes to realize that by making an inflexible law that he did, he has now come to a spot where if he doesn't find another way to save Daniel, then he's in real trouble. And he couldn't find a way. He looked all over, he tried all how, and there was no way he could change the law. So he had to abide by the law. So he was trapped, if you will. He was in a hex. They had convinced him. So the governors introduced Daniel as a captive foreigner. I told you there was some prejudice there, right? If you read it well. Who was he then? This is our president. This is our man who is after the king is him. But they didn't introduce him as no president. They introduced him as Daniel, the captive foreigner who was disobeying the king orders. So they intentionally omitted his great qualities, right? So the king then fall for his tricks, their tricks. He realized they had bad intentions. He spent the day trying to find a way to deliver Daniel from death, but he couldn't. And so he then said, he concluded, which is an interesting bit of witness on behalf of Daniel, that your God whom you serve continually, he knew, this is important, that Daniel was a consistent follower of God and worship God continually. He will deliver you. That was the faith the king then expressed. I find that phenomenal. This is another example of where a Christian's faithfulness influences a non-Christian to realize how good God is. And so I keep saying to you, and we'll say it over again, that the best witness we can make as Christians is our life well lived. Sometimes we use words and stuff, but people see who we are. And if they see you, you know, Covey once said that who you are speaks so loudly in my ears, I hardly hear what you say. In other words, people see who we are rather than what we say. And if we really are genuine and we say the right things, and it's aligned to who we are and how we behave, then people are more impressed than if they saw dichotomy between who we are versus what we say. Then there's no credibility, and nobody has any faith in us going forward. So there's some very pregnant assertions and some very pregnant meaning in all of this going forward, not just a lion den story, right? Anyway, we get to the point of the center of the story, Daniel is shown in the lion's den, right? So draw back the curtains and he's shown in the lion's den. But the key to remember is that God sent his angel to protect Daniel in the lion's den. He did not protect him by deviating him from the lion's den or preventing him from getting to the lion's den. He's saying that while you are in your drama and your danger, I will be with you. And that is important. That is an attitude adjustment that we all must make. A lot of times we pray for God to save us from drama and trouble. But maybe sometimes what we need to pray for is for God to give us the strength to see us through drama and trouble. And that is important, right? So God delivers Daniel. I see a question coming in. Let me just take that quickly. Somebody says, Amen, Amen. Great. All right, so let's keep going. So God delivers Daniel. That part of the story you all know. So the next morning, the king comes and he asks Daniel what has happened. And this is Daniel's response. I find that phenomenal. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. Not the king now, but God. And also, king, I have done no wrong before you. Daniel pledges his innocence. And that is important, right? So after a sleepless night, Darius went on, he's still alive. Daniel had paid for his crime. He went, the law was inflexible. He had to go in the lion's den. The law didn't say the lions have to eat you. It doesn't say you'll be thrown in the lion's den. So he was thrown. He went through the lion's den, and when he paid for his crime, he came out unscathed. Similarly with the 3 Hebrew boys, the penalty for the crime was the fiery furnace. They were thrown in the fiery furnace, and they came out unscathed. So that is also a big point, right? So then Darius turned to the true criminals, which are the jealous liars and traitors, etc. And he chose them into the lion's den to see if they too would survive. Well, we know the result of that, right? So he chose them in here, but their death was quick. Some argue, and the text kind of uses a terminology that says before they could hit the ground, they were devoured by the lions, which is phenomenal if you think about it. It just shows how hungry lions were, and they will be watching Daniel and wondering how come the mouth here open to eat him. That's the next story. All right, so let's keep going. Coming out of all of this, though, God is praised. All right, Daniel, and I just want to read those passages. I know it's small writing, but I want to read it quickly. Daniel chapter 6, verse 25 to 28, it says, Then King Darius wrote unto all the people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. See, I make a decree that in the very dominion of my kingdom, men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is a living God, and steadfast forever. And his kingdom which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. So here is the king testifying about the longevity and the prominence of the God of heaven. He went on to say, he, meaning God, he delivers and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and earth, who had delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered. This is the text I was talking about, Daniel 6:28. It says, Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So these were the 2 kings, right? So here again, we find another situation where after we've been through tribulation and God has seen us through, others give praise to God. And that's something that we need to remember as we go forward. All right? So Darius vindicated Daniel and confirmed his position as COO. And Daniel served in that position until the 3rd year of Cyrus at least, right? So we'll come to some of that later on when we get to the other chapters. And we see Daniel as still serving under Cyrus as well. He also vindicated the God of Daniel. And this was a symbol of the final vindication when every knee will bow before the King of Kings. And we talked about this before. I told you that the Romans, after they persecuted Jesus Christ on that fateful Friday afternoon, when it was all over, one Roman soldier, when he saw the heavens open up and became whatever he said, truly, this is the Son of God, right? So it was an indication, if you will, that this was the Son of God. So Tyrese has a question or comment. I'll allow him to talk. Go ahead, Tyrese.
Yeah. Also, the men who betrayed Daniel, he threw their families, their wife and their children also into the den. But why
Yes.
were their family also responsible for their actions?
Yeah. So again, that was a classical Persian Babylonian custom, which was a lot of times your families will pay the consequence of your actions. So that is important, that here it was that when these men were plotting to go after Daniel, they were plotting in the context of where the media Persian culture and the Babylonian culture, because remember Nebuchadnezzar, even when he wanted to deal with the sorcerers and Chaldeans and stuff in Daniel chapter 2, he promised to not just destroy them, but their household as well, right? So clearly, it kind of says that the culture was to destroy the families who were also tied into these people. So really, the people were kind of great responsibility when they made decisions, because they were not just making decisions for themselves, but for their family. So the question is, one more question. It says, well, I have a few comments. Let me just take them as they come. Right? The first one says, after Daniel was delivered from the lion's den, were the three men who were thrown in after him, were they the three presidents under Daniel? I don't know. I don't know if it was just the three who were under Daniel, if there were others. We didn't get that clearly, but it was certainly part of the plot. And to be that high up to approach the king, etc., it may very well be that it included some who were already presidents as well. But we were never given that clearly, right? Another question here says, therefore it's safe to say that King Darius's ego clouded and blinded his judgment so much, leading him to sign a decree putting Daniel as trusted administrator. Didn't King Darius know that Daniel worshiped God faithfully daily for many years? Fast forward to the height of this story, could it be said that Darius, although a Babylonian king, through prayer and fasting began placing his faith in Daniel God, even in the midst of his emotional turmoil? I would say yes. So here is the king, and that's why I said there's a real danger when we give in to hubris and we give in to ego and emotion, because when we do that, we don't think clearly. So the king was so caught up in the fact that they were elevating him to a deity and the fact that he would be the one everybody will show their loyalty to, that he forgot that it would impact Daniel. And that is not uncommon in some cases when people go through what I like to call groupthink sometimes. You know, you're so caught up in what everybody is saying that you forget the impact of what you're trying to deal with. So in that case, he forgot, but then yes, there's a sense, if you will, as you read the chapters, and it's clearly said it, that during that night of sleeplessness, Darius trusted in the God of Daniel. So as a result, as a consequence of Daniel's faithfulness, he would have convinced another heathen king, this time it was Darius, that in truth and in fact, he was the one who should be worshipped and observed at this point in time. Daniel 6:16 suggests that the king knew that Daniel, God would save him. Yes. So Daniel did put some trust. That's another question that came in. Darius, the king, did put some trust in God and assumed that the God of Daniel would be able to save him. And that is also true. This one says here, Daniel's example of prayerfulness in the face of persecution is one to be emulated. As we see national laws approaching, Sunday laws approaching, we ought not to throw our hands in the air and prophesy, but we must be faithful. Sister White says in Testimonies to the Church, volume 5, page 740. Admonishes that we should pray for his aversion until we can accomplish the work neglected. So this person is emphasizing that we need to focus on prayerfulness rather than avoidance. our natural instinct is to ask for avoidance. If we know that something bad is about to happen, we want to avoid that. And we want to pray, God, take this thing away from me. Even Christ, when he was on the cross, approaching Gethsemane, he asked if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. So our natural instinct is avoidance. But we are saying that what is also important is that when avoidance cannot be guaranteed, what is important is that we go through the period with strength and honesty. I want to move quickly. Just to emphasize a few things, there's a poll I want to do at the end of this class today that is important, right? Who else had to die for transgression of the law? Jesus Christ, right? Daniel died for, well, he was showing the lands then for keeping the law of serving God. And we know that Jesus himself also went to the cross. That's why I say Daniel is a type of Jesus Christ. And then what we know is that just as how Daniel came out of the lions, then unscathed the next day. Similarly, Jesus came out of the tomb that Sunday morning, resurrected by God of heaven, right? There's some texts that are important to help us in when we're going through periods of difficulty. Psalms 34:7 says, the angel of the Lord encamps around them that fear him. These are texts that we learn as children, and they must remain with us as we become older. God is our refuge and our strength. Psalms 46:1. A very present help in time of trouble. These are things we need to believe in. Do you have the faith to believe that? Or are you just thinking that you could always work it out yourself, right? So that is important. My closing comment, of course, comes from Ellen White again when she says, Daniel loved, feared, and obeyed God, yet he did not flee away from the world to avoid its corrupting influences. He was in the world, but not of the world. In the provision of God, in the providence of God, he was to be in the world, yet not of the world. With all the temptations and fascinations of court life surrounding him, he stood in integrity of his soul, firm as a rock in his adherence to principle. He made God his strength and was not forsaken of him in his time of greatest need. And so that is important to appreciate how much Daniel remained steadfast. I hope it is a good example and an inspiration to all of us that if we are going through difficult times, we should still remain faithful, and God is our rock to see us through. Any questions, anybody, before we get to the poll? Any questions? All right, so while we are thinking about the questions, I will launch the poll. There are 10 questions in the poll. Two of them are from what we had from before, but if you could fill that out, I will end the poll in another few minutes. We can fill that out and then take it from there. Pastor, you had a comment you wanted to make? Pastor? 1844.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you now.
I was just adding to the text you gave the text is Psalm 37, I think 46:1. I was just adding Psalm 91:11.
Yes.
We shall give charge over thee.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for that.
Welcome.
All right, so if you could take some time and just answer the poll questions, and then we will close off. But again, I apologize for not getting onto YouTube today. We look like we made some quirk or some tweak to our presentation and our software that prevented that today. But we will upload this video onto the YouTube site so others can see it and go back and review it if you need to. So anybody is going to fill out the poll or not? Can you? Given your devices, I assume that you can. The first question is about the lesson was clear and I understood the message. If you agree with that or strongly agree, you can put that up or disagree if you have no opinion. I want to continue participation in the study of the Bible prophecies. I want to see if people can answer to that as well. I've also asked if there are any chapters you wish to go over before we move on, and you could either say no or just go ready to go forward. If there's a chapter you like us to go over, we can pick that up. How many languages are you using right now in the book of Daniel? I have a few of them there for you to pick. That's just the brain teaser to help us remember. Number 5 is, do you think the stories or the prophecies of Daniel are applicable to today? And that is yes or no, really. Which Bible character was also persecuted for the law and thrown into the tomb and later resurrected? And there are some options for you to pick there out of 5, I think. Who walked with the 3 Hebrew men in the fiery furnace? So there's some options here. I don't know if anybody will pick Super G, but that's an option as well. Ancient Babylon was located in the modern day region of, and we have plenty of options there. And then we have some options from Daniel chapter 2. What was the sequence of the nations that was presented? And you can look at that. And the last one is, that was actually a multiple choice. What was the writing on the wall and what did it say? All right, so I'll just give a little bit of time for us to deal with the poll. So maybe the poll has been on for about 3 minutes or so now. I'll just let it go to 5 minutes and then we will pick up any outstanding questions. Let me go to the next slide while we are still on the poll and suggest to you that before we jump into Daniel chapter 7, there are some things I would just like to cover as a preparation for that, right? So we'll talk a little about the origin of sin and the angel Lucifer. We'll talk about Genesis 3:15, which is a powerful scripture that kind of talks about the controversy between good and evil. I want to spend some time talking about the Jewish sanctuary services, because when we get to Daniel chapter 7, the imagery that is used in Daniel chapter 8 and even 9, the imagery that is used there is an imagery that he borrows extensively from the Jewish sanctuary services and how they worship God back in the day. So we want to just understand the architecture and the arrangement of the Jewish sanctuary and how it worked. And then I wanted to talk, we had a slide up at the very beginning of this study. The first day we did this study on April the 4th, I think it was, where we talked a little bit about the history of the Christian church in the 1st century and beyond. And I want to just review that again, because that history, that is not Bible, no, that's straight factual history. That is also key to understanding the prophecies of Daniel chapter 7. So when we meet next week, I will spend some time talking on the first 2 items, which is from the book of Ezekiel. We'll talk about Lucifer and how he became Satan. And then we'll talk about Adam and Eve in the garden and God coming to visit them after they had sinned. And the promise he gave in Genesis chapter 3, verse 50. If we can do that next Saturday, next Sabbath, the following Saturday, we will then cover the ancient Jewish sanctuary services. I think we need 1 day for that, 1 full session for that, because it is a lot, but it's good stuff. And then we'll take the other Saturday to do a brief history of the church and the world after Christ. So it won't be until, I suspect, the end of May that we jump into Daniel chapter 7. And this is deliberate because I think Daniel chapter 7 is huge. And it begins a lot of deep reading into the prophecies, which can confuse a lot of people. So if we don't have the foundation for that, we can arrive at incorrect conclusions. And so I want to spend some time looking at the foundational elements to help us understand that, right? So just please remember that. I see a lot of you now filling out the poll. And I'm not sure if I should end it just yet, but just give you a chance to conclude on that. So thank you all for that. Thank you all for your efforts today. I really appreciate it. See a question occurring here. Oh, somebody's asking any possibility of more frequent study. You don't think that if once a week is enough? Clearly somebody would like to do this more than once a week. No, for now we keep it at just a weekly study. When this first started, the pandemic and the stay-at-home instructions, I thought about doing a Wednesday night, but I think actually today, before this study started, the Prime Minister announced a little bit of relaxation of some of the activities and the stay-at-home restrictions. So I think as things are starting to normalize or go back to a new normal, if you will, people will continue to be occupied with trying to play catch up with their lives. There are also a number of online programs taking place where we have the Southwest Zone doing a Sunday and a Wednesday night and a Friday night. So I don't want to clash with some of those things and compete. So we will keep our 2:30 to 4 o'clock slot, if you will, and allow that to kind of guide us and deal with that. So somebody is giving me a question here that says, I have a question in the chat. Let me take the question first. Taken from Prophets and Kings, it says, thus the prophet boldly yet quietly and humbly declared that no earthly power had the right to interpose between the soul and God. Surrounded by idolaters, he was a faithful witness to this truth. His dauntless adherence to right was a bright light in a world of moral darkness in the heathen court. Daniel stands before the world today as a worthy example of Christian fearlessness and fidelity. Does this mean the church must take this position with regards to future decrees? Example, stay at home. So I say no. I don't know that it ties in. So in truth and in fact, Daniel is indeed a good example of faithfulness in the face of heathen worship and idolatry, and he certainly remained faithful to God, and we give God the credit for that. Stay at home instructions were not given to stop or worship to God. They were given to protect the nation as a public health disaster. So that is a clear distinction. I think all over the world, all the churches, not just us, have adopted that posture to say that it's about saving lives, right? So there was nothing in, now that doesn't mean that there may not be future decrees that may affect our ability to worship God. And when I say affect, I want to say it very carefully. There's affect and then there is prohibit, right? So in the case of this stay at home, it may affect our ability to gather as a church, but it doesn't affect our ability to worship God. In the case of prohibition, if somebody came and they said, you are not to worship no other God except this God, or not to worship on no other day except this day, that's a different conversation. That is a decree that goes against our freedom to worship and our freedom to act, etc. And that's an interesting one, right? So that is not the kind of thing that we want to pay attention to. So we accept the quote in Prophets and Kings. It is a good one, but we are not extrapolating that to suggest that we go out our way to provide trouble and drama to the people around us, right? All right, so I think a lot of you would have completed the poll. I will want to end the poll now and share the results with you. So I can just go through that quickly. The lesson was clear and understood. So strongly agree was the main question here. Want to continue? Almost everybody said yes. Are there, I take it you all have seen that, right? Are there any chapters you wish? Well, okay, everybody ready to go forward. Somebody wanted to go for the handwriting on the wall though. So we'll try to just do a quick recap of that when we go back through the chapters. How many languages were the book written in? And you all got that right, Hebrew and Aramaic. Do you think the stories and the prophecies in the book of Daniel are applicable today? Everybody said yes to that, and I'm happy about that. Which Bible character was also resurrected from persecuted for the law, thrown into a tomb and later resurrected from the tomb? Jesus. And again, you all got that right, that's great. Who walked with the three Hebrew young men in the fiery furnace? Nobody picked Super G, but somebody picked the chief fire officer of Babylon, but it was Jesus. And then ancient Babylon was located in which modern day region? Somebody actually said West Africa. If anything, it should have been North Africa, but it's really Iraq and Iran, which is what we had on its side. The nations represented the division of Daniel chapter 2 in sequence. And 92% of you got it right, which was Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome, modern Europe, God's kingdom. But somebody had Assyria, which is wrong. Assyria wasn't in that list at all. And then somebody picked up the sequence of where I had India, European Union, USA. Clearly that was wrong. And the 10th one was, what did the writing on the wall in Daniel chapter 5 say or mean? And it says the Persians outside. That was, I suppose, I put that there just to see if there was any appetite for this. Somebody thought it was what it said. We need more grog, drinks your lot. Somebody actually clicked that, which I find that to be strange. But the one that is really there was that you've been weighing the balances and found wanted. And then if you pick your kingdom will be destroyed, I'm also, I put that there deliberately because that is also part of it, right? So thanks for taking part in the poll. We really had a good session today. I know I feel a little bit bad about the YouTube, but I saw that I think that was just some fiddling with the settings in Zoom, and I saw that out. And like I said, I will upload the video. But thank you all for participating, and I thought we had a good day today. All right, so see you next week when we talk a little bit about Lucifer and Genesis 3:15, and then we'll talk about the sanctuary service and the history of the Christian church over the years before we jump into Daniel chapter 7. All right, thank you all and have a good evening. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers who are with us today, and I trust you have a good Mother's Day. Maybe the announcements from our Prime Minister saying that we are relaxing some of our restrictions will be good for your Mother's Day, but we'll see. Some of that takes effect from Monday anyway as opposed to tomorrow. So, so let's keep safe, keep pushing the personal hygiene and remaining vigilant. And then remember, you can go to YouTube and review this presentation if there's anything that is unclear to you, so you can be part of that. See you next week at 2:30. Thank you all. Have a good day. Oh, thank you, Charlie. I forgot that I did not pray. So let's pray to close. Thank you for that, Charlie. Let's pray to close. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessings you bestowed upon us and for being able to study God's word today and the messages you provided. We know for sure that you are still in control and you're still in charge. And even when we are going through persecution and we're going through periods of unfair treatment, you are still the God who will see us through. If you can save Daniel from lions, then you can save us from any trial and temptation today. We ask that you bless us, keep us safe, and allow your Spirit to guide us. Is our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. Have a good week, everyone. All the best. Thank you, Charlene. Have a good one.